Warm and joyful greetings to you all today. Welcome to Nurture the Soul. I'm Traci Howe, the team leader and minister for faith, education, innovation, and formation, your faith info team at the national setting of the United Church of Christ. Nurture the Soul is a weekly webinar sharing practical, educational, innovative, and formational resources, engaging critical topics for local churches and people of faith. From cultural and community organizing to congregational leadership, from worship and theology to resourcing small and rural churches, from ministry with youth and children to wide-ranging justice issues, we feature guest artists, authors, and key leaders. This is a space for connection, community, and nurture. Together, we can bring our church, our community, and the world towards the world God imagines for us all. So join us here every Thursday at 3:30 Eastern Standard Time for Nurture the Soul. And you can always find a full list of our digital offerings and webinars at ucc.org/events and any of our social media platforms. And dear community, if you find value in these offerings and are moved by what you hear today, we ask you to consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ. Simply by texting UCC to 4144. Your critical financial support helps to sustain us, and we thank you with gratitude and care. So next week, we will start a new series hosted by our Minister for Worship and Theology, the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Lindsay has put together an incredible series on ritual, creating ritual, hybrid ritual, and is bringing a wonderful offering of guest speakers to be in conversation with. So please join us for the next month and take part in this incredible growing opportunity. But today I am very thrilled by what is being offered. Traci Blackmon has put together another special speaker offering, and I'm just so excited about it because I've been a part of this project for over 3 years, and I care. And the person that Traci will be in conversation with is someone that I love and care for and will for the rest of my life. So Traci, thank you so much for putting this together, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce our guest.
Thank you very much, Traci, and hello, everyone. It seems like it's been a long time since I've been in this space, and I'm really excited to be back here and definitely excited to be in conversation with the Reverend Vahisha Hasan, who has served as editor of a new book that hopefully all of you have already heard about that is being offered through the Pilgrim Press at the United Church of Christ called Building Up a Better World, Building Up a Better World. And I hate when I have these backgrounds on because you can't really see what I'm saying, but he should hold up the book for me. Do you have a copy with you?
Usually I do, but I just moved.
I am surprised you don't. Well,
everything is in a box now.
Someone just put it in the chat for us, Laura did, and I have the book, but it keeps disappearing when I try to show it. So I want to spend this time talking with Reverend Vahisha today. Reverend Vahisha is the executive director of Movement and Faith and is deeply invested in the ways activists and faith communities further collective healing and liberation. She is the board chair of Transform Network, the rapid response coordinator for Track 4 Movement, which is trauma response and crisis care, and the program director at the historic Claiborne Temple in Memphis, Tennessee. So with all of that going on, we should count it a great gift that she spent the time working on this project with Traci Howe and several other amazing activists who are engaged in trying to save democracy and save society. They might argue that they're not trying to save democracy. However, what we are trying to do is make a better world together. And I could think of no one better to talk to today, especially in light of our socioeconomic climate than you. So this book, I want to say a little bit about Building Up a Better World, is a compilation of wisdom, of stories, of journey, of pathways forward that are offered by people working at various touch points in the movement, which makes it special to me because it's not just one person's opinion, it's not just one view, but it is people who are writing while they're living it, right? Writing while they're engaged in it, and being shifted every day by what is happening in our socio-political context and in our spiritual and communal context. And so I want to begin by asking you, why this book and why now?
We in our faith language so often talk about such a time as this, because we feel that, like we feel that in our marrow, and we're living in these seasons of such a time of this. Every opportunity in this life, gift of life that we've been given. I want to start by saying thank you, Reverend Dr. Traci Blackmon, for choosing myself and Reverend Ann Dunlap to be the editors for this work. Building Up a New World is our baby now. We love it. Ann calls me her book baby mama, so there we are. So we birthed a whole book, and I'm deeply passionate about it, partially for what you named. This is not that our voices are not powerful and important and vital, but this book is a compilation of voices and lived experiences on the ground, a combination of on the ground frontline understandings of organizing, in addition to faith-rooted organizing, and especially coming from peoples who have experienced the oppression that we're organizing against, right? So we have such a beautiful swath of people across race, across gender identity, across sexual orientation, across even geographical locations of where they are living. And it has added up to just this beautiful meal offering. There is a table set in this book, right? And you can sit at this table and eat from what you need and discover some new things that you may like. And so one of the reason for the book now, today, is like, so faith folks, we already have a language and a culture of faith that we recognize, right? That's part of being in a congregation, part of a faith family. So this book speaks that language, and that becomes very important. If you've ever been in organizing spaces, sometimes if you're really new, you're sitting there like, because there's a whole new language happening. There's a vernacular available that feels really new. So the book speaks a language of faith and honors the culture of faith while also offering new language, additional learnings, ways of looking at church culture in ways that can be used for good. So we present ways that our already organized congregations can come together, not just to enrich ourselves and our faith and undergird our own communities, but to really, really fight the ways that evil is organizing. And I will even say evil is organizing and organized. So how in the ways that evil is organizing and evil is organized today, how then are our faith communities organizing to confront this evil? You got like a both and. We need to confront the evil that's organizing and organized, but also we want to continue to be a force of good and goodness, of love and liberation. And there's a language that we need for that. There are social political learnings that we need for that. There are ways that congregations can see themselves. The book invites them to see themselves and honor the ways that they are already organized, and turn those same tools and maybe even some additional tools into being an organizing force for goodness, love, and liberation. And we have quite a battle happening, and our weapons of warfare, as we know, are not all of carnal and flesh in the ways that the word speaks about it. And so we have a divine assignment. We have divine support, and we have a divine assignment. And this book speaks to that and will equip you for that divine assignment.
So I want to stay there for just a moment, right? Because what you lift up that is different about this book is that it is targeting faith communities,
That's
right?
correct.
Lots of organizing books, and people read them all the time, and some of them are very well done. And some of them can work in conversation, even with this book. But what makes it unique to me is that it is actually targeting congregations. And I want to talk with you a moment about congregations, because my experience in this area is that oftentimes when people talk about congregations that are mobilizing, what they are talking about are congregations that are allowing their leadership to be actively engaged, right?
Yep.
And I see one of the goals of this book is to shift that narrative that the whole village should be coming out, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I've been doing a little bit of reading around, Acts 12, just locating this for myself in this moment, because we are now living in a time, as you mentioned, Reverend Vahisha, where it's not going to be enough for just the leaders to be going up. And, leaders are in the pews too. So nobody write me and tell me that. But I'm talking about the pulpit representation that is
identified church leadership. Yes.
Exactly. That is often defined as the church when they're out in the street, right? And so I was thinking about Acts 12 when the early church is still in its formation, right? And in that particular chapter, there is this interchange that is documented with King Herod, who comes after the church because the church is a threat, right? And this is during the time, when Peter gets arrested, or somebody gets their head cut off. I can't remember which one it was, right? It's like, it is dangerous to be the church in the early church, because the church is a threat, a direct threat to empire. I'm curious to know your perspective on where is the dangerous church now?
Listen, I just had a chill go through listen, don't be asking me. Woo! That is such an excellent question, and even an excellent framing, because there are pockets of dangerous church happening. That is, they are available, it's happening. But the gap between the how many churches are dangerous and how many churches are comfortable and afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll go all the way to the whole spectrum, the whole threshold of there are churches on the side of empire, right? And so some of this feels like really good assessment of identity assessment. Maybe there needs to be some measuring of where your local body is. Your local body a dangerous church? Is it a brave church? Is it a content church? Is it a neutral church? Is it a church on the side of empire? Mm-hmm. And some of those designations would be helpful. I'm going to use this language forever now. Thank you, Reverend.
Well,
Dr.
it comes from a sermon that I'm working on, that I'm going to be preaching soon.
I want to be there. I want to be in some virtual space when you.
In search of dangerous church, right?
My dream is that every church should be dangerous. I mean, to your point, going back to the actual sacred text that we use as our guide, that we see as our guide. The church has moved in a lot of ways. The capital C church, if you will, has moved from being a threat to empire to a tool of empire. And that is a problem. And that comes from empire theology, and that comes from empire infrastructure, and that comes from a dependence on empire to run the church. So with all of those embedded and integrated things, then you become less of a threat and more of part of the machine.
So I'm putting that in dialogue with this book, because the thing that excites me the most about this book, Reverend Vahisha, is that it holds up a mirror to that, right? And it holds it up from various angles. So if one really reads the offerings from the various activists here from a faith perspective, right? The activists are challenging us to be that church that the empire must fear.
It's
So
correct.
I give you some credit for the title of my sermon, but so I want you to talk a little bit about how you see churches being able to use this resource to help them assess where they are on that, no shame. Let's just get it right, right? How to assess where you are on this spectrum, and how to move into a place. Now, don't hear me saying that I'm saying anybody should be dying for it. It's harder to live than it is to die, quite frankly. And what I'm trying to say is the empire ought to tremble when the church shows up. And that's not the case most of the time. And so I have visions of this book being able to help people along that journey in ways that will shift the narrative and the atmosphere that we're in right now. What are your thoughts about that?
The shift is where we live, and the shift part feels important, right? So part of that shift you already named, of moving from maybe like whatever identified church leadership is, right? So whether it's the pastor, even across some multi-faith spaces, what does that look? Whoever's the headship, right? And what does it look like then for the full congregational body to navigate and grapple with these issues in a way that forms a coalition building of verbing, of doing, of the going out, right? And so just math, pure math, in the shift of one leader over a given amount of folks, where if that one direct leader tells the people to do one specific thing, then maybe half of them will move, or half of them will do the thing, or a quarter, depending on what is happening, in the church. But what would it look like, for folks in the congregation to be able to have, I'm gonna do it like this. I'm even just go back to the Reformation, if you will. Think of the difference when the sacred texts are read in your own language. Right. So there was a time that access to scripture, somebody had to read it to you, or somebody had to interpret it for you. And I think there is a part of the building here is for folks to have like I said, the language and the infrastructure and the culture of organizing for themselves. This is a translation for you. Right? This is a translation for these people to be able to do, and even Seth, who's in the comments talking about this, to do what is discipleship. That you went back to the why today, the discipleship of today. Yes, is to be able to live and breathe and verb into what these chapters are walking you through, and how you can be a force against those things, a force against the things, and also a force for the good things, right? And so we need capacity building. That's the next shift. Again, back to math, you have one leader who can do so much. And so if the church has enough coalescing around the leadership, participating in, progressive movement spaces that's for the good of all people. But what would it look like even for the capacity building to move beyond that one person to 50, to 75, to 200, to 2,000 of that leadership? And that is what is needed. That is what is needed. And so at some point, our discipleship needs to be really passionate and individual to us as we do that together with everyone. So that's part of the shift. And then another part of the shift just comes in some unlearnings, just to be super, super real about that. We need to really unlearn some of the ways that we have been taught about what power means, right? So that yes, power comes from God, but there's not why are we conceding our power that is also still giving to us and conceding that to some of the ways that harm is navigating. I mean, just roaming all over the earth, devouring, right? And so several shifts in that, shifts in mindset, shifts from ways of assessing how we do church as charitable offerings, which are still valuable. Listen, please keep feeding and clothing the people, right? Keep meeting the needs of the people. And as MLK and the Black Panthers and 50 other 1,011 revolutionaries have talked about, how do you also speak to what places and keeps these folks in these human conditions? And that is part of the shift. So we need to shift to understand, evaluate, and guard and work against forces and structural types of things that are keeping people in human conditions that is not intended by God. Right.
Yeah.
And so these are also some of the shifts. And so, I mean, just to knock off some of the chaptering things, structures of oppression, right? Oppression is heavily layered. It's layered and it's baked in. How do we identify these places where white supremacy and structures of oppression are running? And then even power analysis, like I said, how do you shift from honoring your power in a way that's not ego, it's not the puffed up that the scripture is talking about, but it is walking in power and might that you actually need for your divine assignment, right? And so then there are chapters on how do you do that in a healthy way? How does that sustain that? So many different things that are built upon each other for folks to be equipped and unlearn some of the things so that they can walk in their fullness and walk together towards some common goals.
That's wonderful, Dr. Vahisha. And I want to remind people that we do have a Q&A. If you have questions, please put them there. I try to keep up, but between chat and Q&A, it helps me if the questions are all in one place. Some of what you're talking about, I have begun naming as embodied discipleship. Right.
Yes.
Sometimes in the church, we treat discipleship as the way the secular world and the church sometimes treats justice as an appendage. Right. But the idea is to embody discipleship, not to do discipleship as an activity, but to actually become the disciples. I love what you're saying about that. And I really appreciated the way Ann Dunlap kind of gives a foundational premise about what this is that makes this work necessary, right? In terms of, in this particular framework, she's talking about white supremacy and racial obstruction. But this understanding of how systems work is transferable to all oppressive systems, right? It's the same technique. It's just that the characters change a little bit. And so I really, really appreciate that. Donna Van Hook, who's with us today, says she'll be purchasing the book in the near future. You actually won't have to if you stay with us, Donna, because you'll receive a book as a gift for being a part of us today. But how involved is the congregation, church, and or religious leader to confront ideals contrary to democracy? This is a good question. Let me ask you that
question again.
How involved is the congregation / church and or religious leaders in confronting ideals contrary to democracy? Is there any specific mention of running for office with regards to socio-political activism? And what is the magnitude of faith-based organizing? So she asked you 3 questions in one.
Yeah, so it feels like the first question of the involvement is actually not our measure, it's your measure. It speaks to that self-assessment that we were talking about in the beginning. So there does need to be some measuring of your congregation, just as there needs to be measuring of my congregation. Now, if we're speaking about what would be the ideal involvement, it would be to impact. That's why the full title of the book, you have Building Up a New World, and it's congregational organizing for transformative impact. The level of involvement needs to meet the desired impact. What impact do you want to have on whatever issue means the most to your congregation? And the level of involvement needs to meet that goal. to all the way through to impact. Yes.
I hear her reaching, I agree with what you're saying 100%. Just looking at the entire question, which you're not looking at. So that's why I'm saying that. I think she's getting at the political part though, right? What should be our contribution to democracy in a way of standing up against things that are threatening to democracy in its purest form, right? So how do we feel about people running for office? People used to ask me that a lot. And I used to say, I still believe in heaven and hell, and I'm trying to go to heaven. So politics is out. But I'm changing because I'm seeing saints in Caesar's house. I'm not changing in terms of wanting to do it, but seeing that it's possible. I used to think it was antithetical to be in office. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that? And what's in the book about that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. And to some extent, this is me speaking from me. Yes. And you may have differing folks that have differing ways that they would view this. But I would part of what when I do faith-rooted work, I also often speak to faith folks to even back to language, right? To even shift a little bit from just naming everything politics in the ways that then we push away from the table, because we're like, oh, I don't do politics, or the church can't politic, even though that I could do a whole season on that. But if you shift from thinking of politics to policy, and then the electoral process being to elect policymakers, right? Yes. So policymakers who are elected by people who want the types of policies they are looking for to be represented in the electoral space. So you have representation, not just for representation's sake. Don't even think necessarily identity, right? But representation of the policies that you want to see put forth and or protected. And we need to think both, right? Because we can't take for granted, as we have seen in our today, that the policies that are on the books can't be taken out the books.
Right. Right.
So I strongly think that the electoral path is one way that you can be impactful, that you can be transformational and impactful. And so I fully support folks running for office. Where I not necessarily diverge, but would supplement is you need to have almost a communal approach to this, right? So you might be a candidate or you might support a candidate, but that candidate needs wraparound support all the time, not just during the election. And that support includes accountability. And then also, if you are the human that's looking to run for the office, then you need this book's level of breakdown of how these different issues and different forces are working together. And they show up in every type of structure and infrastructure in our governing bodies, right? So you can't, unfortunately, just go in and be like, I really care about this, and I don't have to care about this other thing as much, or even in the ways that you prioritize. But understanding how these things work together will only help form and fashion an electoral process. So I'm in full support of folks running for office, doing it as a policymaker, impacting policy and protecting some policies. So in impacting, removing harmful policies, right? But then protecting policies that are still protecting people. So that's my question for that one. Can you tell me the other parts again, or if I need to say more about that?
Let me see if I can get back to it. You've touched on it. Is there any specific mention of running for office in regards to socio-political activism, and what is the magnitude of faith-based organizing?
So there are some electoral aspects in the book, but it is in no way a primary one, right? Because there is impact also deeply, heavily available outside of electoral politics. And that's part of where we want to actually activate faith folks. Politics is one thing we recognize because it's so in our face, but there are also ways to be transformative outside of electoral space, right? And let me add this part, which is a beautiful piece. The more that you do transformational, impactful organizing in your local context only supports the policymakers that are in office, or to remove folks who are not in office. In Memphis specifically, because of work that we did around the death penalty, and specifically this one Black man's case, we went to the corner bearing witness for 2 years around how policies were harming folks, particularly who may have been innocent, but also ways that that racism and classism impact folks who are even just trying to navigate the carceral system. Because of that faith-rooted bearing witness work on the corner, then one of the most harmful DAs in the whole country was removed from an elected position because we highlighted enough of the harm that she was doing in her position. So we didn't have anybody specifically faith-rooted that ran for her position, but we used an organized coalition body of faith folks to highlight the humanity and the dehumanizing way that she was functioning. That was enough to remove her from office. So see how the things work together. So it's not just enough, back to in such a time as this, it's not just enough to run for office. It's not just enough to vote for the folks who are doing the policy makings, but you need to lift the issues that are at hand in the policies as well.
Amen. I like that. I do have another question from someone who's listening, but I want to link it with something that you said, kind of like I won't say a throwaway, but in a long list of things you were talking about that I think gets to a core part of this book, right? Which is deliberately not about lifting the individual, but lifting the community and lifting the congregation, lifting the village, which requires a certain level of community building within itself, right? I love the Audre Lorde quote that Dr. Marilyn Pagan Banks uses in the book, that there can be no liberation outside of community, right? Right. And so when you mentioned impact, like a measurement is what is the impact that you want to have? I would suggest and offer for your examination and critique that perhaps impact is the entry point of dialogue in congregations and communities, right? Where the top-down level would say, the pastor decides what we're going to do, or the social justice leader decides what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. Perhaps a better or more generative question in conversation and dialogue with this book is, what is the impact we want to have, and how can each person or each group or each couple of people, how do they perceive their offering toward that impact? Right? So that you are addressing issues from multiple touch points. Does that make sense?
It does. And speaks to one of the things that I hope people hear and don't hear, or receive and don't receive in this messaging. And I just want to shout out Jade Perry's chapter on disability, which even in that moment, you heard me shift from hear to don't hear to receive and don't receive, because she has taught how to not use ableist language in all of my understandings of the way we navigate the world. But that's an aside, and ways that book is amazing. That chapter is amazing. So I would say impact as the measurement is perfect. And one of the things I'm concerned about, and one of the things we name over and over and over in the book, is don't necessarily pick one issue or just start some new thing. Mm-hmm. There are communities outside, within, and around our faith communities that are probably already doing this work. whatever this work is. So if your faith community can land on 2 or 3 issues, because I think the other thing is if you try to get any number of people to decide on only one thing, you're going to spend all your time doing that.
Mhm.
I mean, just think about the funny ways that we talk about couples just trying to figure out what to eat. And you only got 2 people in that, right? So similar ways, you spend 30 minutes trying to figure out how to go 5 minutes up the street to eat, right? So maybe pick a couple of issues that your faith community deeply cares about. And part of the book, many parts of the book guide you through how to identify shared interest and goals and folks already in the world and in the community who are doing this work, and how you align your values with folks who may be better versed, have a longer history, already have wins, have a track record, like all these different things. So when we talk about, there are ways that the church can come alongside the work and be a part of it. So again, for example, our Bearing Witness on the Corner, we came alongside the Innocence Project.
Mhm.
Right? So we came alongside an established group that is already doing this work, who taught us some things, and were able to say to us, we're not faith-based, but as faith folks, if you do this Bearing Witness on the Corner and highlight the humanity of these issues, then we'll go do the policy work and the publication, the amplification, blah, blah, blah. So there are multiple ways that can also happen. And that feels really generative and important, because if we had spent all the time trying to get our individual churches to make a social justice ministry in order to determine what t-shirts we're going to wear to bear witness on the corner and what the t-shirt's going to say, you know what I mean? You get bogged down in a lot of things. So there are ways to do some of this long-term work. I think that does need to happen in the church spaces. By all means, have a social impact ministry, right? Please. But also part of the book totally guides you to how to develop relationships in spaces and places that you may not have entered before, but are waiting on you and need you to be a part of the impact work.
I love that you said that, because my understanding of true movement work in the church is always relational, right? And so the social justice ministries are new. I grew up in churches where, the pastor would say before the benediction, uh, typically, I'm 60, so it was a more gendered time, would say, um, men stay in the sanctuary afterwards, and then you see them change into overalls and they're going to fix somebody's house. It's relational, right? Even your reference to learning to be more expansive around ability issues and disability issues comes out of relationship,
That's
right?
absolutely right.
So I think that's important. Carolyn Collins asked this question that is always dear to my heart. She said, the state has the subtle power to control churches by removing tax-free status if a congregation gets too, quote unquote, political. How do we deal with this? And before you answer, I want to insert here that in my experience, Carolyn, the church very rarely understands the laws around that. And we, um, mostly progressive churches, have taken it to mean that you can't have any say in politics, which is not at all what it means. And hopefully your church understands that. If not, you can help them understand the difference. Life is political. What we cannot be is partisan in inviting only one side of an argument if we're going to invite elected officials. So we're told. But we've just gone through about 6 years of watching many churches do exactly that. That's a whole different situation. So I want to hear from Vahisha about this question. But I also want to say we're in a climate where we have to count the cost and say, what is the price of our silence, even if it is risky at times? That's what we're entering into, unfortunately. What is your take on this a very real issue for lots of churches and denominations?
Yeah, I fully agree. And this is where relationship can really help. Like, let's say you don't have a human in your congregation who can read all the legalese involved in your very specific geographical context around tax-free status, or the specific ways that your church is set up as an entity. But Reverend Traci is exactly right. Even if you don't know anything else, the major huge difference is just to not be partisan. So you can take on any human condition, any issue that impacts humans, you can take up as an issue. You just don't do it in a way that endorses a specific candidate or a specific political party. But human conditions are political, period. Right. And that's where we want faith folks to embrace that aspect of it, that even the book, the body politic, the body is political. Our bodies, our human lives have been politicized in the way that policymakers have set it up, our governing bodies. So if you don't know anything else, don't be partisan, and also if you develop relationships with nonprofits and even different types of nonprofits in your area, they can help you distinguish between those things. So like in Memphis, with like Stand for Children and a couple of other organizations, they really help us parse out C3 status and, for-profit, nonprofit, like all these different political statuses, and they help us navigate that. So even while we were doing the Bearing Witness on the Corner, we had organizations who have people on staff that have that level of knowledge, who helped us navigate it in an authentic, integral, like an ethical way. So we weren't trying to dodge something. We were trying to be in alignment with our values and in alignment with these tax status designations. And so one of the examples that I want to name, because it's really stark and I think really beautiful. So Reverend Dr. Andre Johnson, who is a pastor in Memphis and just an amazing human. And he led the charge for this Bearing Witness on the Corner for Purvis Payne. One of the things he did he is a pastor, and one of the things he led at his church was during their discipleship time, which is like Bible study, right? So think Bible study. They did a full line by line review of every ballot that was up for election in this last voting time. And they did this in a nonpartisan way, which meant they went through the whole ballot together as a church every week until they got through the whole thing. And that review included looking up the person, looking up their track record, every person, not based on political party, but and not just the person, but what was the role. So maybe it was they were a very specific circuit kind of judge. What was that judge over, right? What was their previous track record? So they looked at the position and the person running for the office, and did this amazing review. Now, again, this is a very electoral based thing. So I really want faith folks to not only have that pathway, but not be scared of it, to the point of the question, that there are ways that you can inform and equip and organize your faith community to be very, very active in an issue-based way, and also in an electoral-based way. It's just nonpartisan.
Thank you. And Michael Neurath, who is the executive director of our DC Policy and Advocacy Office, put in the Q&A some reference materials that we already have available for people who share Carolyn's concern. And thank you, Traci Howell, for transferring that to the chat. I was trying to, but I am web challenged in those ways. So I'm
You're doing great
for that assistance. Bruce McKay has a question. In writing this book, have you come across examples of congregations becoming more vital and growing in multiple ways as their collective voice in the public arena becomes more powerful?
So I haven't, the book just dropped in July. So I haven't, I don't have as of yet a specific example of a church that has reported this out to me. But what I can report is I've had many individual people who are going through and reading this together, even not as a organized yet part of their church, but reading it through together. And then they are like, okay, now we want to start pulling the folks that we are in faith community with. So that's been really interesting. And I like that because, again, part of the goal is we are trying to reach the individual congregant, right? But then also we want that congregate to see themselves as part of an organizing body as a congregation. So if that comes from one that is really becomes passionate about it and then it feeds into, that is happening. The other thing that I'm also seeing that is deeply intriguing is because I'm deeply in movement community, I have some folks who are not connected to a specific church body at all who are reading the book, and they're like, okay, well, maybe let me look at faith-based ways that I hadn't thought about that this work could happen, and maybe I would be willing to reconnect with a church if they were even remotely willing to be a part of the way that a congregation can move in this way. And so that is also has been really, really encouraging, because back to relationship, there are, we could get into the Pew reports and the data and all the things. Part of the reason that people are leaving congregations is because the congregations are refusing to address the issues that they care about and their lived conditions, right? And lived conditions of people that they care about.
And there's also a way to use this material. I had not shared this yet, but I'm keynoting the National Social Workers Convention, and I'm using the book as one of my references for that. That is not a faith organization at all, and it's going to be made of multiple faiths, but the principles of community building are applicable, whether it's a faith community or a social club, right? If you're in the Links or Jack and Jill or any of these sororities can use these same principles around faith. I did want to give an example to Bruce McKay. It precedes this book, but it's one of my favorite UCC stories, and it has to do with University UCC in Chapel Hill, which really started on the campus of Chapel Hill in a small little church. And they were worshiping there in a church that held about 75 to 100 people when HIV and AIDS came on the scene. And the church, the hospital, Chapel Hill's connected hospital, was beginning to see AIDS patients, and it became known some kind of way by the pastoral leadership here that there was no chaplain for people who were admitted with HIV or AIDS, right? I'm getting to this impact it can have. This church took on that issue, that there was no one to see patients with HIV and AIDS, and they decided as a church that they wanted to pay the salary of a chaplain if the chaplain could be assigned to the floor to minister to people who were suffering and at that point dying of AIDS and HIV. And the church took this on as a part of their budget. They budgeted for this chaplain who did not work at the church at all, was only a full-time. They had to pay benefits, etc., for this chaplain. And they did that for a couple of years when the hospital began to notice the change in the patients and the families, and decided, because of what the church was doing, that it was an effort they should take on. As a result of that, the church got known for stepping into this courageous space that people were fearing. And the next thing they did was they had a daycare, and they opened their daycare to children of people who had HIV and AIDS. There was nowhere that would take the children of HIV and AIDS people. Long story short, because I don't want to take too much time, the church began to grow because of this ministry. The church, the preachers are excellent. I'm not, no shade, but the church began to grow because people wanted to know what church is this, and how can I be a part of something that's impacting lives like this? And eventually, the university bought them out with enough resources to build a huge church that now holds multicultural worship, and next door to it has a residential housing that it partners with the city for men who need a place to live, not just a shelter, but a home, apartments like. There's a medical center on the bottom. All I'm trying to say is churches grow when churches have purpose.
Yeah.
Not just a prophetic message. People need a purpose. And the church grows when it can find its purpose. So there are examples of that happening. It's just one of my favorites to tell.
That is a beautiful example, and I love and I'm grateful for it, because it articulates again how to not default to the only thing we know, right?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not making politics, electoral policy not important, but we don't want to only go in the direction we've only ever seen. And I mean, that is an example of how that church took something totally within their values and were able to make a huge impactful decision, and that impacted the policy of that whole hospital.
Absolutely.
It may not have impacted electoral policy, but it impacted the policy. So that's why I like policy making, even to be the language around that. But it impacted the whole policy of the hospital, and that's beautiful. But it impacted those humans, the humans who were living with HIV and AIDS and their families. And if ever there was a way that we are reaching for how to love on and be in community with the least of these, not least in value, but least in resources. Yeah, that feels huge. I love that, Reverend Traci.
Great. Craig Hoffman has a question. He says, I've become more involved with public engagement with potential voters on the issues of repro rights as we in Ohio prepare to vote on a ballot initiative in November. Let me tell you, they're playing dirty on that ballot initiative. You need to be following it. This included delivering yard signs to local UCC and DOC churches for distribution to members. This gave the pastors and leadership a reason to talk about the topic, and includes placing a yard sign in their yard as an act of expressing their values. My experience over the past several months has convinced me that the majority of people are yearning to hear the voice of the progressive Christian perspective. Posting my presence in the public square on social media empowers others to show up, stand up, and speak up. It's not a question, but it's certainly something that we can amen and say, yes, this is how it works. And this is what this book is about. There are multiple chapters in this book. I want to say about 20. I might be off a little bit. 15.
Yeah.
And so I can't recommend it highly enough. We are almost out of time. And someone's asking about Patrice. Did you have a question? Your hand was raised. If you can post it, that would be great, and we'll take it. As we're waiting to hear from Patrice, I'd like to ask you, Vahisha, to tell us one of your favorite parts of your baby. That's a hard question, because if it's your baby, you love all of it, right? But today, given that we are in the climate that we're in, what part of this book, what is one of the parts, I'll put it that way, of this book that's really speaking to your soul and nourishing your soul in this moment?
Yeah, I'll say I definitely, it's hard. It is hard to find a favorite part. And I just want to uplift the comment that just happened. And I want to lift the public theology. That piece is huge. And the more you verb your theology in public, the better we all shall be. Because for folks who are lifting theology public to harm people, let's please be public in our theology to hold people. And this is the distinction. Make it clear that your public theology is to hold as opposed to harm, and people will resonate with that. So then the favorite parts of my baby, I have two probably. So a huge, let me tell you what changed me the most. And I know all the humans in the book, right? So I know them, I'm familiar deeply with the majority of their work, meaning like have been with them on some front lines in person. And truly J. Perry's chapter, even in the titling, Come As You Are, Possibilities for Dreaming Disability Justice in Congregational Contexts, just blew my brains, and really helped me as an organizer, as a faith human, as a disciple, but also as a preacher, specifically how to look at sacred text in a way that again holds as opposed to harms. And that was really, it was huge. And I think part of it is because there was such humanity in her chapter. Like, how do we see each other as the fullness of our humans in these bodies? And how do we navigate the world that way? And what are all the ways that we may have been navigating it, not knowing that there are humans that have to navigate it in these very, very particular ways? And I think that speaks obviously for folks with different abilities, but more broadly to the ways that an issue, you may not have HIV or AIDS, or a child that is a child of HIV and AIDS, but you got families that are navigating it before that church stepped in this way. So how do we open ourselves to different ways that people navigate the world, even if it's not those that impact us directly? And that was really huge for me. And then, of course, because I wrote it, I also wrote a chapter. So, I mean,
if you were going to go there.
I'm just saying, my beautiful bias is that every chapter is extremely important in our understandings of how to do the work and how to do it with principle and vigor and impact, right? And then the chapter that Teresa Mateus and I how to be well while we do the other 14, right? So, because if we are not well while we are doing the 14 chapters, then that will impact our ability to impact, right? So we need healing of ourselves and of our congregations and of our communities to be included, not a side dish, right? Like, so it's like, we don't want to be like, oh, we got to talk about this power and we'll do a breathing exercise before we talk about the power, right? Like, so it needs to be more integrated than that. So how do we sustain ourselves as we sustain this work? Reverend Tracy, I did a webinar yesterday and I pulled pictures from Charlotte Uprising. And I have a picture of you when we first met in Charlotte. And I think about the things that you had experienced up until then, the things you've experienced since then. And I got so even emotional just uploading the pictures because so much of the death and life of that time, it still lives in my body, right? There are still emotions and deep things about that. So like, how do we navigate our wellness with what we're holding and as we continue to do the work? Because what if we had lost you or lost me because we could not remain well as we are doing the well-doing?
And I'm meeting more and more people who are coming to terms with the unwellness. I want to say I enjoyed every chapter of the book. I got to read it in its raw form. I should read it in its edited form, but I got to read it in its raw form. And there were things that challenged me about each chapter of the book, places where I needed to stretch and grow, in memories that reminded me I haven't always been even as far as I am now. And the contribution of Jade really touched me because I can remember at another part of my journey in another place, I was leading women's ministry and there was a moment of prayer for healing, right? And there were 200 and something women in the room, and with all their different theologies and my theology still being formed and and deconstructed and being malformed. And there was somebody in the room who was in a wheelchair. And I remember someone going over to her, not asked, not requested, going over to her and getting behind her to push her wheelchair into the center of our prayer circle. And you feel me, right? Just
I'm like,
push in the center of a prayer circle. And the powerful moment that could have been and maybe still was devastating, but the power that this person took, right, to say, while the room was hushed, and this person was saying, you know, God can heal you. And she said, with confidence that still gives me chills, I am disabled and I am whole.
and I am
I
right.
don't need healing.
Woo.
You know what I'm saying? It shifted my whole trajectory.
Same.
And the readings of Jade in this chapter did that for me as well. I saw one final question here, Vahisha, because we could talk forever about this stuff.
You are correct.
I lost the question. I didn't know me. Let's see. Are there any faith-based action roles responding to COVID in the book? The book seems interesting. And right before we came on, we were talking as a behind the scenes group about the impact of writing during a pandemic, right? This book was being birthed during COVID.
That's exactly right.
And so there's no way that the impact of that time in our nation would not be present here.
It's present throughout, especially because people were writing in first person while still, sequestered at home, right? So, and then even as we were going through versions of a return, if you will, or a difference in ways of being. So there's a COVID, speaking to ways of COVID throughout, both even in think of like power, like who got to make decisions about what. Again, back to ways that we found out how much people care or don't care about each other. In ways that we put some individualism over our communal wholeness.
Yes. So I just saw a button that let me move that background. I wanted to see that's still not working.
Come forward, right there. Right there.
What am I supposed to be doing here? Hold on just 1 minute.
It went to blur. Yeah, there you go. Look at you.
Here you go.
Building up a new world.
Building up a new world. Congregational organizing for transformative impact. I want you to know that because you have been our guest today, that we have purchased for you a copy of Building Up a New World. The line will stay open for just a little bit. If you will put your address there, or no, let's not do it that way. If you will, Tracy or Laura, if you will put in the chat Denise Pittman's email address. And if you will email my assistant with the tagline Building Up a New World, just send her a quick email with your address. The books are already in our mailing room, ready to be shipped out to you. Don't put them in the chat because I'm certainly not going to remember. But there is her email address, Pittman, Pittmand, as in Denise, @ucc.org. Just put in the subject line, Building Up a New World, and put your address. We are so thankful for your time today, so appreciative that you've taken some of your time on this last Thursday in August to be with us to talk about what we will be promoting for quite a while, this book, Building Up a New World. At the national setting, we do not believe that it is for us to do all of the organizing, but it is for us to walk and accompany our churches in their process of being the public witness in their context. And then we serve as a mirror and an amplifier of the work that you are doing every single day. Not all of that is done in the streets. Not all of that is done on TV. Not all of that is done because it's a national voice. But there are ways you can make a difference in your communities, in your neighborhoods, in your churches, and yes, even in your homes every day if you embody discipleship. And this book will help you learn how to gather those who are like you so that you
Yeah.
can have a stronger impact in all that you do. Reverend Vahisha, I want to give you the final word and then ask that you close us in prayer.
Absolutely. I want to thank my co-editor, Reverend Ann Dunlap, for navigating with me through the curation of this book, and through COVID and loving on. We became very pastoral. We talk about this. It became very pastoral to be editors of this book because this book was birthed through and during COVID. And then I want to highlight that we do have this partnership with Eden Theological, where they're doing a series of workshops and courses that you can take that uses this book as a full anchor. Myself and Reverend Ann Dunlap are leading that course on October 21st. And you can connect with Eden Theological for more information on that. And then just deeply grateful to the UCC for doing exactly what that other church did, putting resources behind meeting a need that you identified. And that is how we got here. And so we're deeply, deeply, deeply grateful.
I certainly want to give a shout out to Reverend soon-to-be Dr. Traci Howe for leading us down this pathway. I count it a joy. It has been a wonderful joy to serve with her in ministry, with them in ministry. And so I'm grateful for her nudging and her persistence about this book as well. The book is available now. You can order it through the Pilgrim Press. And Carol, you have a book coming your way at no cost to you, but you all are welcome to buy an additional book and give it to somebody. That's how we spread the love. And all you have to do is put your information, not in the chat, but send it to my assistant, Denise Pittman, at PITTMAND as in Denise at UCC.org. Just put in the tagline, Building Up a New World, and add your address, and a book will be coming your way this week. I hope that after you read it, you will leave reviews about the book, because that's how we spread the word, and that you will tell someone. Share it with your congregations. It would make a wonderful fall Bible study, summer Bible study, whenever you want to do it, small group work. This is how we get started. I was just talking to someone yesterday who was so adamant about what God was calling them to do. And then I asked them, well, how are you going to do it? And they didn't have a plan. And I heard come out of my mouth, it's not enough to have a promise. You have to have a plan. God promises us that liberation will come, but that doesn't mean we don't have to have a plan. And this book is about helping us have a plan that integrates our faith with the force that we need to confront what we are addressing. Reverend Vahisha, I count it a joy to spend time with you, whether I'm spending it in your church home or on web or in some other configuration. Thank you for taking the time and for saying yes to this massive project and seeing it through. To you and to Ann, I say thank you.
Thank
Will you close us in prayer?
Absolutely. Thank you in return. And we always, myself and our pastor, Reverend Dr. Gina Stewart, love to see you up in the house of Christ Missionary Baptist Church. So you are always welcome in the Memphis. Absolutely. All right. God of love and God of liberation, we thank you for the ways that you have formed us and continue to inform us and put us in formation together. We thank you for this time that you have created in this virtual space and look forward to the way that seeds are planted and you water the growth of that. Thank you for all the people that made this book possible, this work possible. Thank you for the lived experiences of the chapter authors, and thank you for their lives and their work in the world. And we look forward to what shall come forth of the sacrifice and intentionality made by the UCC, and we put this work in your hands. We put this book and tool in your hands, and see the ways that you will expand it beyond our wildest dreams. And as Reverend Dr. Traci said, may you bless the promises. May you bless the plans. We were created to be in relationship with you, and we are created to be in relationship with each other. Make it a beautiful, loving, divine relationship of wholeness that spreads in such a way that people cannot help but ask us, what is it that made you move in this way? And we will point to the God of our faith. And then we will point to the love of each other. And it's in the name of love, it's in Jesus's name, that we declare that we believe in these promises and these plans. Amen.
Amen. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey, and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.